Well, I wanted to ask you what your relationship to this film is, and even in a broader sense, what your relationship to the work of Paul Thomas Anderson is.
So I suppose I'll start with Paul Thomas Anderson, just generally speaking, then. Like, I think the first film I saw of his was Magnolia, and I was probably way too young to have seen it. I remember feeling quite shocked with some of the stuff I saw. And that's probably one I need to rewatch soon because I don't think I've seen it in like the past 10 years.
Yeah.
But I think the one that really hooked me in, that I fell in love with, was Punch Drunk Love.
Mm,
Because obviously Adam Sandler just whether you love him or hate him, he's sort of an icon anyway.
yeah.
And it was such a fascinating role to see him play this awkward, probably neurodivergent character in a way where he didn't know how to process depression and trauma and
Hmm.
all of these things. And it was such a sweet film that he's allowed to be happy in the end, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
And it just really stuck with me. You know, I think partly because I'm autistic, and although my own neurodivergence doesn't completely mirror Adam Sandler's in that film, I did see part of myself in him, like this sort of at the time when I saw it, not quite fully sure how to express myself, lack of
Hmm.
confidence, things like that.
Hmm.
And then from there on, I suppose it snowballs into wanting to, discover the rest of the films that he's done. So Boogie Nights blew me away. It
Yeah.
always blows me away. You
It's
know,
unbelievable.
no matter how often I see it, it's always like I'm never fully prepared for the places that film takes me.
Mhm.
And he's one of those filmmakers who seems to be able to direct whatever he wants and manages to do it really just whatever story he's trying to tell, he tells it so effectively.
Yeah.
Like Phantom Thread or Licorice Pizza, or Inherent Vice, these films that some filmmakers might pass their prime at some point, and he's still churning out what you could argue are like modern classics,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Absolutely.
So specifically the master, I don't think I have like a super close relationship with this. I saw it for the first time when I was finishing film school like 10 years ago when I got
Mm.
my BA. And I suppose I found it really captivating because it's such a complicated film with such nuanced, detailed performances.
Yes.
Then my memory faded on it, and so I actually rewatched it this morning to get the freshest
Hmm.
um, recollection of it I can. And it was a more complicated film than I remembered. It's left me wondering what is the best way to approach a film like this.
Yes, I
Um,
and
yeah.
I had a kind of similar reaction. I chose this film because he has a new film coming out this year, which I'm very eagerly anticipating.
Mm.
Another Thomas Pynchon adaptation.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, it's I believe it's Vineland is the book, but the film is called One Battle After Another.
I see. I didn't realize it was a
Um
Pynchon adaptation.
yeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Vineland, which is one that I've not read.
Mm.
I've only read a handful of his books. He's a very challenging writer.
Yeah, I did Gravity's Rainbow in uni, I
Yeah,
partially to try and show off, and then
sure.
I actually got really into it, although I
Yeah.
didn't fully understand it. And then The Crying of Lot 49,
Hmm.
which probably his shortest book, probably I felt like it was a much easier read, but not
Hmm.
necessarily easy to
Yes.
process.
Yes. Yeah, that one I've read. I read Inherent Vice after I saw the film,
Mm,
which I think was his. I think the first, probably the first experience I had seeing one of his films in theaters.
mm.
Because I did see it when it came out. This one I was aware of it at the time, but for whatever reason, just didn't see it in theaters. But it's one that I have revisited pretty often over the years because I find it just endlessly fascinating. Not only the themes, of which there are tons, which we can discuss at length, but I think there is something in the performances of this movie, in the way that these two men interact specifically,
Mm.
that feels simultaneously so real and authentic, and also kind of mystical and unknowable a little bit,
Mm.
and hard to understand. And it's one of those things where every time these two men are on screen together, it's utterly magnetic. You just
Yeah.
cannot look away. And so I was eager to watch it with the intention of trying to analyze it a bit more than I had in the past. And it's like you're saying, it's kind of hard to approach in that way because there is so much under the surface, and but I think also just so much exquisite craft in this
Yeah.
film. The production design, especially, I was taking note of last night when I was rewatching certain scenes, and the score. I mean, Johnny Greenwood's score. He
Yeah.
always knocks it out of the park, but this one is particularly effective to what you're seeing on screen, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's a subtle score as well. Like,
Yes.
sometimes I didn't quite notice it, and then there's other times where this gentle kind of not unnerving, but sort of I don't know how to describe it. There's like a swirling sound, like a swirling motif that sort of seeps in every now and again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it kind of put me a little on edge as you're talking about as you mentioned the central relationship with Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman's lead performances. It made me think there's parts of it where I sort of felt like, yes, there is a sort of mystical element, and there's almost maybe it's on the nose to call it a little romantic, but I think there is almost an element of it like, oh, that they do genuinely kind of need each other, not in a
Yes.
literal sense,
Right.
but like there's almost like traces of what could be a romance in any other bond.
Mm-hmm.
And here it really unlocks this intimacy that you just don't see too often between what is supposedly two platonic men, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, there is this kind of like there's this inescapable attraction between them, and they are these two opposing forces kind of colliding with each other. And I mean, I think about the processing scene, the first processing scene, where we
Mm,
really get to know what is kind of going to become the kind of power dynamic between them. And as the movie goes along, you're thinking about kind of how they are sort of mirror halves of the self,
yeah.
but they're also both so self-absorbed, and they have these overinflated egos, and their own individual senses of like masculinity are constantly at odds with each other. And yeah, I just these two guys really got to certain places, I think, in this performance
Yeah.
that
It's
are
intense
just
to
really
witness.
remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that first processing scene where he is getting him to repeat the same answers over and over. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost like he knows just how to chip away the surface of Joaquin Phoenix's Freddy character.
Yeah.
He knows there's something there he's not quite telling us, and you do get glimmers of it in that moment. He doesn't necessarily tell us everything, but you find out that actually he's had an incestuous relationship, or
Mm-hmm.
he denies it, but there's a question about, I think, past regrets. I can't even remember the exact wording, but it's something like, do
Do
you
oh do
allow
your past mistakes haunt you or worry you or something
something
like
like that?
that? Yeah.
Yeah. And he's denying it, but then we kind of gradually learn actually there's a really big one about letting the love of his life get
Mm-hmm.
away, and it's sort of impacted him in a way that he doesn't really know how to behave around women or men. I suppose he
Yeah.
mentions that
Yeah.
he can't stand men being close to women he likes.
Hmm.
You know, it makes him jealous,
Yeah.
and he becomes this sort of spontaneous, volatile personality when he feels like a man is too close to a woman he likes, like it's somehow a threat to him.
Right.
That first processing scene, that it reveals so much without revealing much at all, in a way.
Yes. It's simply in the way that he's kind of reacting to the questioning, I think too. I mean, we get to know in this in kind of the very first scene when we're introduced to the character, we get to know quite a bit about him just in those kind of short. It's
Mm,
almost like a montage kind of stitched
yeah.
together, but we're seeing that he's clearly obsessed with sex, but also has kind
Yes.
of like a childlike, immature relationship to it, and is very.
Mm,
He seems very emotionally stunted, and he's drinking the fuel from the boat,
yeah.
and he's clearly got some substance abuse problems.
There's like a lack of awareness about surrounding the people surrounding him, or
Hmm.
the situation he finds himself in. Like, as you mentioned with sex, there's the model of the woman made out of sand,
Yes.
and initially the men around him think it's funny, and then he turns it really uncomfortable.
Yes, he keeps going for far too
Yeah,
long, and
yeah,
it becomes this very awkward, uncomfortable, tense such even how he talks to other characters and how he interacts with other characters
mm,
is very strange. He has this kind of antisocial behavior, I think, that categorizes a lot of how he interacts with people. And I think in that processing scene too, we're learning so much about how he does interact with the world around him. He mentions his parents, but there's almost no relationship there.
yeah,
And mentioning the relationship with Doris, who is of course a teenager, and they have this
yeah,
very inappropriate kind of courtship,
yep,
and he doesn't know how to handle that. There are all these things that are kind of create the perfect stew for someone like Lancaster Dodd to
yeah.
kind of swoop in and
Get
kind
his
of
claws in.
yes, exactly, take him under his
Like
control.
you always hear about cults with charismatic leaders who prey on people who just don't quite fit in wider society, or they're
Hmm.
vulnerable in some way, and it's very true about Freddie.
Yes.
Like he tries to fit in, you know, coming out of World War Two, you're probably struggling with PTSD, a whole heap of mental and emotional trauma, and he tries to have a conventional job, and he just can't stand it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he can't fit in anywhere. You see him at
no.
the department store taking photographs, and there's
Mm,
that great scene where he kind of loses it on that guy. He's moving the light
yeah.
up closer to his face. I love that scene. Just the
Mm,
antagonizing that character, and things like mixing the darkroom chemicals to make his own alcoholic.
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
he's concocting these toxic, truly toxic
Mm,
beverages, and of course ends up. I don't know if it's advertent or inadvertently poisoning the old man who he works with on that farm in that one scene.
yeah.
It's kind of left deliberately unclear whether he did that on purpose or not, which I think is also
Mm,
kind of an insight into that character. But yeah, he can't seem to reassimilate into regular civilian life after his duties with the army or the navy are finished. And there is that theme kind of all throughout this movie of like,
mm,
this man is clearly a soldier, but he's a soldier in peacetime.
yeah.
And how do you re-enter life? How do you? There's that great scene where their staff sergeant or commander or whoever is telling them, he's saying things like, "Some of you will open a business, some of you will work in retail. So you'll do this, you'll do that," and all of the kind of faces you're seeing there, they're all just kind of sitting there, very stone faced, very emotionally
Mm,
vacant and distant.
yeah.
Um, I was really interested to learn. So I have a Blu-ray of this, and it's a very minimal release, but there are a few kind of choice special features on there, and one of them is a John Huston documentary from originally made for the armed forces right after World War II. And I learned that this was a big inspiration for PTA for this movie, because
Wow.
there are scenes from this documentary that he kind of reuses almost note for note. It's essentially all about these men who are dealing with PTSD. Of course, at the time they don't know that it's PTSD. The psychiatrists who are treating these guys, they are coming up with these new methods of trying to, allow these men to kind of work through their trauma, but all of the research and science is not quite there yet. So it's this very interesting kind of snapshot in time of dealing with mental health. The Rorschach tests are taken from that documentary, which of course is like such a disturbing scene in the film. All he can imagine are naked women, and it's almost like, is he
fucking with him?
right? Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah,
I initially, like, if you're seeing it for the first time and you're watching it, it's like he's sort of getting a bit of, it seems like he's getting a bit of a kick out of it, but then the more you
yeah,
spend time with Freddy, the more you realize, no, he does actually just have this dysfunctional hyperfixation on sex, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And I watched that documentary this morning, and it was very illuminating. It actually apparently wasn't seen until 1980,
Mm.
because it was viewed as kind of regressive to the I think the kind of nationalistic, the way that the armed forces at that time were like very much about trying to get people to enlist. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of exposure here to how these men really felt, because there are very candid scenes where they're kind of talking openly about what they're dealing with. And so that film was kind of buried for a long time. But then the other kind of very interesting through line of this movie, and one of its prime sources of inspiration, is the kind of Scientology sort of cult
Mm.
thing of it all. And the fact that PTA initially had the idea for this film in 2000, right after he had worked with Tom Cruise on Magnolia.
Mm.
And there's this really interesting, like, did some of his interactions with Tom Cruise, who was at that time basically starting this whole Scientology kind of, he was
Mm.
really into it at the time. And there's a famous story actually about PTA went to screen a print of Magnolia for him at Tom Cruise's house, and at that time he was kind of trying to convert Paul Thomas Anderson
Mm.
to the cause, to the religion. So it's interesting to think about the various completely disparate places
Yeah.
that this film comes from in that way.
I mean, I think Scientology, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly like the year it started or anything, but I
It
think
seems like around the 1950s, I want to say.
okay. So, I mean, I think it's the clearest comparison, isn't it, when you're watching
Hmm.
it? I think partly I suppose in a sort of meta parasocial almost kind of way, because we recognize Philip Seymour Hoffman and we recognize Joaquin Phoenix and we recognize the connotation of Hollywood with Scientology. Not
Hmm.
to say that these actors are Scientologists, because I don't think they were or are or whatever.
Hmm.
But I think you think, at least for me, I'm thinking, oh, Hollywood A-listers and cult Scientology. So
Yeah.
it sort of becomes like,
Yeah.
yeah, it feels like such it's a natural connection to make, you know.
Yeah.
I believe Joaquin Phoenix grew up in a cult. Yeah.
Yes, his I think his family left it when he was still pretty young, but yeah, there is
Mm.
that really interesting metatextual kind of wrinkle to all of this, which leads me to think that perhaps he really understood something very deep about this character, and why they
Mm.
would be drawn to such a person. And I mean, when you're watching Philip Seymour Hoffman in this film, he is so magnetic and
Yeah.
completely charismatic, and
Mm.
everything he is saying does lend this kind of air of, not credibility per se, but his words had this weight of importance. I
Yeah.
think. And the way he speaks to people and what he's saying, especially in that scene where they're all kind of sitting around and the guy comes to question him
Yeah.
basically in front of his kind of party of guests and everything. And they have that very heated argument. That's the first time anyone kind of calls attention to,
Yeah.
is this a cult in the film? Otherwise, that word
Mm.
isn't even mentioned,
Mm.
which is also really interesting because it's the people who are involved here don't really have much question. They kind of are very blindly following this man who seems to have developed this extrasensory
Yeah.
method of being able to heal our pain and heal our past trauma. And of course, coming out of World War II, that's something
Mm.
that would be very that
Comforting, really.
yeah, exactly, would
You
appeal to
hear
many people.
about this theory about past lives and
Hmm.
how your spirit always lives on. You sort of think, if you've lost people in the war, or just if you're suffering from grief, these very relatable human feelings that we'll all eventually have.
Hmm.
There's believing in some sort of afterlife or some sort of reincarnation or whatever. There's great comfort in that. So, I
Hmm.
mean, if you're gonna prey on people to follow your cult, you would prey on the vulnerable who want something like that to connect with.
Hmm.
I think it's partly why works well. Does it completely work with Freddy? But I think it's
Yes.
partly why he gets so engaged with it is because he is looking for a way to connect with something beyond his continual isolation.
Yes. Yeah. He needs some sort of community to be
Mm,
a part of. And I like what you said there too, because there's this really interesting thing of, is he going through all of this believing what Dodd is saying? Is he because it can be read so many different ways. Just a testament
mm,
again to Joaquin's performance. It's so multi-layered because there are all these scenes where he's very clearly frustrated by
yes.
the tests that he's being put through, and you also get that kind of almost throwaway comment, but when the Dodd family is having dinner and Rami Malek
Yeah.
is talking about, he's saying, I think the cause is more dedicated to Freddy than Freddy is to the cause.
Yeah. They're all sort of speculating how genuine he is. I think Peggy thinks, I mean, the son, what's his son's name called?
Oh, uh,
Clark. Okay.
Clark, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so he's thinking, oh, is Freddie here to steal your unpublished works?
Hmm.
And I know Peggy, played by Amy Adams,
She's
doesn't believe.
fantastic in this movie
Yeah, she
too.
is. There's actually numerous scenes where I think she's the one pulling the strings.
Yes,
She
absolutely.
she's the
Yeah.
one who makes the definitive decisions. But yeah, I think she says something like she just doesn't believe he's at all engaging with it, that he's maybe faking. And you watch and sort of like maybe he is, maybe he's just that desperate to connect with people.
Hmm.
But then there's some parts where Lancaster, Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, there's some parts where he manages to chip away with the sort of repressed traumas and ideas that Freddy is keeping deep inside.
Hmm.
Like you're almost like he's trying to engage with this technique. So I don't think it's a really complex portrayal of like, is he completely buying into it? He's certainly protective of it,
Yes.
but I suppose that's going to come down to whoever's viewing the film, really, right? I mean,
Yeah, and what's so fascinating too, I think, about these things that Dodd is doing, there is a lot of, in the roots of this, there is a lot of sort of standard psychology
mm,
work, and some of the ways he's going about it seem very kind of absurd and far-fetched, but there are certain things there that I think that is not all dissimilar to psychotherapy, and using kind of putting yourself under a kind of hypnotic state, I think, especially.
mm,
So it seems like, on the surface, that there can be quite a lot of benefit from this sort of thing, especially for someone like Freddie, who is so kind of chaotic at his nature and has this very turbulent relationship with his past and with everyone around him. And with, I mean, it's that scene when they're, after they've been arrested, is so powerful.
Yeah.
But Dodd is saying over and over, I'm the only one who likes you. And there's a real truth that they get to in that scene between the two of them and with their power dynamic, which I think ultimately is kind of what this movie is all about. It's like the obsession with power and how it changes people and who is using who and who is the used kind of thing. And Joaquin is in those scenes, in that scene especially, which actually first I love when the cops show up to the house and they claim that he's under arrest and Dodd says, "Goody, what are the charges?"
Yeah.
Like his attitude towards it is so
he's used to being hassled, I guess.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
They're trying
you can
to
tell it's
search
not
for
the first time.
Yeah, they're trying to search for any sort of bogus reason to send him down, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And Freddy kind of explodes in that scene. It takes three men to kind of finally take him down, pin him down.
Yeah.
Then when they're in the cell, the stuff that Joaquin is doing in that scene where he's slamming his head up against the
Destroys
bunk,
the toilet,
which all of that was apparently totally improvised. They kind of
you know
just,
what, I could believe it. I seen that scene this morning. It reminded me that I had read he also improvised a scene in Joker where he bashes, I don't even know what it is, like I think it's where it must be one of those things you punch a card in to do your hours.
Yes, the time clock.
He smashes it and yanks it off the wall, and supposedly it's improvised. It's like, yeah, I could see it. I could see he's clearly got a place he goes to where he unlocks this sort of side,
kind of primal rage.
Yeah.
I mean, even his physicality, the way that he holds his body with his kind of shoulders hunched forward and his hands kind of always on his hips, and he's so skinny. He's very kind of thin and gaunt, but he moves kind of almost like an animal. You know, he's just doing so much, I think, and it's kind of the perfect match point to what Philip Seymour Hoffman is, which is this basically immovable object who has convinced all of these people that he has basically the answers to the universe. They talk about at length about this being billions of years old, and even he even mentions trillions of years, and then is challenged by that guy to very seriously saying, well, we only understand the Earth to be a few billion years old, which is, you see the kind of first real chink in his armor, I think, there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about those. There's like, it doesn't happen often, but I think there's at least 3 scenes where he loses his cool, and it's almost like everyone looking to him for answers, and almost like those parts where he loses his cool, it's almost this vulnerability of, I don't have the answers here. So there, it's when in that soiree party thing where he's got that person being vocally critical, and Philip Seymour Hoffman calls him a pig fuck.
Yes.
And
Great line.
It's like, it's so startling almost, because it's like, oh, I've not seen this character blow up like that. And that's because, you know, he doesn't really have any other answers to convince this guy who's clearly riled him up.
Yes.
And then there's a part where Laura Dern is reading his new book and says, oh, well, I've noticed you've changed the wording here from consider to imagine, or something like that. And because I suppose because he doesn't quite have a convincing answer for that, he explodes at her as well. It's just like, it's this, it's kind of subtle, but it's like humanizing the cult leader in a way of like, oh, that erases the image of like godlike wisdom that you know they try and portray themselves having, you know.
Right. And there's all this I mean, there is all this uncertainty kind of bubbling throughout the film around what he's saying. Even his own son is like freely admitting he's making all this up as he goes along. That
Mm,
scene that he has with Joaquin, the kind of back and forth.
yeah.
And at that point, Joaquin is just so Freddie is so blindly loyal to him that he's
Mm,
willing to even start start something with the guy's own son, and being uncertain about what is the second book, when is the second book coming out. They
mm,
go to the desert to dig up the kind of chest that has his life's work in there, and there's all this mystery behind where Dodd came from and who he was previous to this. And it feels like maybe, I don't know if you watched any of the deleted or extended scenes from
I
the film.
haven't. I don't know if my DVD includes it.
Yeah,
I'd have to check.
there's a little, it's very interesting because it's kind of edited and cut together as if it were its own kind almost standalone short film. It's about 20 minutes
Mm,
long, and a lot of the, I mean, usually when you see deleted scenes or extended stuff, it's not scored to music, it's not really edited
mm,
in its final form. And this is really interesting because there's music throughout. You have characters kind of talking in certain scenes while you're seeing new footage from different scenes. So there's it's this really interesting thing of it adds kind of quite a lot of context to certain scenes. There's one where when they're going to the desert to dig up that stuff, the scene before is Freddie and the son-in-law, Rami Malek's character,
mm,
talking in a bar, and that's when he actually asks him the question, "How much do you think that's worth?" So they actually
mm,
what when Rami Malek's referring to that in a later scene, they did film that, and it was ultimately cut. But there's some other things there that kind of lead you to some more information about who Dodd is as a person, which I think is really interesting. But ultimately, feels like it was the right move to kind of leave him
mm,
intentionally sort of vague and mysterious, because the more mysterious he is, the more kind of power he has over these people,
mm.
right? Sort of what you were talking about of it wanting to be portrayed with this kind of godlike wisdom.
Mm,
There's this really interesting idea throughout where Freddy blows up, they push him away, and then he
mm.
kind of comes back and they re-embrace him, and then they push him
Yeah.
away again. It's this constant push pull.
Mm.
I love when he comes back from the jail and they kind of embrace on the
Yeah,
lawn
and
there, and
it's
then they
quite
start
an
wrestling.
unusual one. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like almost like reverting back to being little boys playing dog pile or
Hmm.
something. You know,
Yeah, very much.
and no one else is really endeared to it. It
Right.
seems to be like they're just all watching from the porch quietly.
Hmm.
Whereas if if you knew someone close to you was really happy to see someone again, it would be almost infectious, right? You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And what's so interesting too is Peggy, I think, is there, and she's kind of more worried about the child who's playing in the yard, and she's like worried about the.
Mm,
I mean, she's the only one who really recognizes that Freddie is a dangerous man,
yeah.
and has clearly done things in his past that are dangerous and harmful. And she is the one who's constantly sort of telling Dodd that this guy has to go.
Mm,
But also she seems willing to, invite him back into the fold. I love at this kind of stage in the film is when the tests, the applications
yeah.
start getting deeper and weirder and more absurd, and they're
Mm,
doing these kind of almost exercises you feel like theater actors might do. This
yeah.
kind
I
of
was
like
thinking that.
yeah,
Yeah.
very like physical work, and the kind of the staring, like unblinking, questioning, attempting to access a previous self. It's all very theatrical and very
Mm,
kind of playing make believe a little bit.
yeah.
And as these tests get more kind of intense, Freddy is starting to lose it
Mm,
more and more. When she says "turn my eyes black," a
yeah.
very strong scene. And the I think what's really cool is the score in this scene is speaking to what you were talking about earlier. It's very like intentionally putting you on edge. The way he
Mm.
uses the percussion, the kind of like clacking
Yeah, you
sticks
can
and
feel
everything.
it's almost like the irritation is infectious, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, if I was in Freddie's shoes, maybe I'd be getting irate and
Hmm.
I'd be like, I don't know what the fuck you wanted me to feel here.
Yeah.
It's not like panicking. There's something just, yeah, it feels all very off kilter, and maybe that's the point. Maybe, I mean, obviously that's what Paul Thomas Anderson's intending with the scene, but I mean, like in terms of the assessment, and it may be the point is to, I don't know, to make us unravel on some level.
I
I
mean,
don't know.
yeah, it's almost this kind of ritual brainwashing that's
Mm,
starting to go on with. At this point, I feel like Freddy is kind of fully under their control,
yeah.
or at least they believe he is,
Mm,
and he starts becoming, I think, closer to Dodd. This is also around the same time that they're taking his portrait for his book. I love that very subtle but small scene when he's taking his portrait and he's fixing his hair.
yeah.
Right before there's a very intimate closeness there in that scene between the two of them, kind of speaking to what you mentioned at the top of the conversation, which is there a kind of very real love between the two of them.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, like, I suppose, maybe the most obvious point is that there's a scene, Freddy drives off with a motorbike,
mhm.
um, and
Incredible scene.
tries to find Doris, and she's moved on without him, and it's
Yes.
probably affected him. And then he gets a phone call in the cinema, and I think Dodd literally says, "Come visit us in England." I think he says, "I love you," if I'm misremembering.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and he
Yeah,
mentions where they met or where they have met in a
yeah,
past life, which has been kind of one of the threads of their relationship throughout. Dodd is constantly bringing it up, saying like we have to figure out where we've met, and that's
yeah.
also his manipulation tactic of keeping Freddy kind of under his control and in his camp of
Imply they're soulmates.
yes, yeah, and
Mm,
implying a past relationship that sort of necessitates a present relationship.